So, comrades, welcome to the revolution. It's over. We, the capitalist software workers of the Western world, truly control the means of production. The enemies of the workers have been crushed. We can express our values freely, and our opponents are openly ridiculed, ignored, and belittled. Everywhere I look, I see workers taking control, agile, mob programming, remote work. It's always from our point outward, pushing away evil forces from above, from the outside, and from the sales department. All this, and it seems we never really had to fight for it. And it's probably all kind of a lie, of course. We'll get to that as well. And it's also funny because the man in the picture, Dan Abramov, is probably the least dogmatic prophet ever, which just goes to show. Hi, I'm Fredrik. I'm a semi-professional listener by nature and a programmer by trade, and I'm childishly excited to be here. I'm working at a company called TimeEdit, where I solve scheduling problems by doing front-end stuff mostly, mainly in the browser. But if you happen to have heard of me, it's probably more because of this podcast, Kodsnack, which I do with 3 friends. We started in 2012, and we were early enough that we thought we were the last ones to do it. There's still plenty more space for Swedish programming podcasts, so if you want to talk, you should A, start your own podcast, and B, you could get in touch with us. We love to hear more voices. We always need more voices. And it can also be a great way to prepare for presentations, just for example. And I love links, I love notes, I love to be able to read up, so links will be in the show notes, and this link will be on the last slide as well. So if I mention something here which seems offhand and remotely interesting, you should be able to find the link on this page. If not, yell at me and it will appear. And I would like to take this moment to say that, of course, I have no idea what I'm doing. Part of this talk is to point out that probably most of everyone has no idea what they're doing either. So I feel I'm in good company. And all the good ideas in the talk are guaranteed to be from someone else originally. I will try to point it out where I know, but the order is probably mine. And this is a really fun work in progress, so it sort of represents how far I've got thinking about this whole area. Stuff have come and gone. So it was different yesterday, especially the day before yesterday, and it might be different tomorrow. So let's go. The revolution. I think it's kind of fair to say that we as developers have this really enviable position right now. It's not just that we're like in demand, it's that we get to dictate so much of how things work, how we work, and also even how other people worked. And it seems to be just because we're so in demand. And perhaps also because we have these really generally available tools and we like solving problems as well. That might help. But a quick recap. This is how you did development back in 1995 or so. We've come pretty far, haven't we? I mean, the internet was young. The NPM woman would come by with her cart to the village twice a week. And you were lucky if she had left pad in stock, and the build machine was kind of steam-powered, and we had canaries to tell us when to get out because the build was failing. And, well, we were working in a room. We call it a room, but it was really a box in the middle of the road, all 137 hours. You know the drill. And it seems, I mean, there was a time when nobody thought developers were that special. Kind of strange, maybe. We were those strange people in T-shirts hacking away in a dark corner somewhere, and we were let them wear the T-shirts and be kind of happy if they don't show up at the break room too often. And the difference to today is pretty striking. I mean, look at this. It doesn't look quite like a dark room where I'm alone speaking into a microphone, which is what I usually do, but still. I mean, somehow, we cave dwellers, we got social events like this, lots of them even, and we can work wherever we want, we get to pick our own tools, we get our own computers, we get to make lots of stickers. I mean, we even get this amazing amount of say in how our organizations work. I mean, you have agile development, you have DevOps organizations, office setups, and somehow it seems to start with us, like the fixed point in the middle of the universe, and everything is orbiting around us, and we're sort of pushing stuff outward. I don't know. I would like to see some research into this. Is it just because we're so in demand that we get to be these wizards? And because we like to solve problems, we think the rest of the world is a problem for us to solve as well. We can do it best. We have NPM. And it's also funny to me that we have these really strong pushes against what we see as opposition. I mean, we have to push outward all the time. And if people try to tell us what to do from the outside, it usually doesn't end well, does it? So now what? This is what I was trying to figure out creating this presentation. And I've split it into 3 aspects or sections. It's stories we tell ourselves. What if we slow down? And finally, good things to do, ? I'm trying not to put this on the quit all jobs not related to colonizing space and saving mankind, because we are working programmers, and I want to at least try a bit to keep this a little bit grounded in reality. Probably will fail, but still, that's my angle. And I'll also try to sort of go against popular opinion or popular perception in some places. It's a good exercise, I recommend it. So, stories we tell ourselves, or perhaps the quest to prove ourselves. There's this thing I'm thinking about. It feels like we are kind of in love with difficulty. We love to talk about how difficult our line of work is, and on one hand we seem to really want to be perceived as a really serious discipline. We want to be some kind of engineering. It's like hard stuff you can quantify. We love measurements, we want data, we want procedures and white papers and reproducible results. And on the other hand, the stuff we do, it's so difficult, we can't even have processes, rigid processes like other disciplines. No, we need to have agile. We need to shun process because, I don't know, because of our fragile artistic souls, perhaps. Whatever the reason, it sort of goes a bit against this hard data aspect. And we keep trying to sort of make sense of ourselves, I guess. And I went back quite a bit, perhaps to, I would call it the earliest still famous attempt at discuss and quantify software development. And it's, of course, the mythical Man-month, which was first published in 1975. And it chronicles the experiences and thoughts of Fredrik P. Brooks Jr. No, Fredrik Brooks is my father. And he had experiences managing the development of OS 360 at IBM in the 60s. So it was a while ago now. And this book is the source of established wisdoms like adding people to a late project makes it later. It's sort of the source for the term second system syndrome, where you rewrite from scratch and end up with this big mess that you never finish. Hello, Netscape. And a lot more stuff like this. And like all classics, lots of people talk about it, people refer to it, some people have even read it. And it's basically a series of hands-on descriptions about what happened and how people worked in the project and observations and ideas based on that. So it feels like a pretty natural starting point for research and for beginning to make software development more structured and more knowable and more of a sort of engineering type business. But to Fred Brooks' dismay, this hasn't really happened. I found it funny and a bit sad, perhaps, when I looked at this book again and noticed his own preface to the 20th anniversary edition of the Mythical Man-month. In preparing my retrospective, I was struck by how few of the prepositions asserted have been critiqued, proven, or disproven by ongoing software engineering research and experience. And he then goes on to add another chapter to the end where he actually puts his assertions and ideas in bullet point form in a sort of last desperate attempt to get people to pick them up and try to prove or disprove them. And I don't think we're making very much progress here. More people are thinking along these lines. There's this awesome little book called The Leprechauns of Software Engineering. It's a very nice short read. It's basically an essay form. And it's not that everything you know is necessarily wrong. It's just that most of the things we take for granted have no basis in fact. And it's worth questioning everything. For example, this book has several chapters on the concept of the 10x engineer. Because that's actually in white papers around the world, and there are references and you can follow them. And this author, Laurent, he digs through this in a fantastic way, nice and short and to the point. And he finds that there's no real basis for this. The variations come from like vague definitions and unreliable ways of measuring, and even like environmental factors. Some people have done experiments where they compared two different programmers working in two different languages, and you might get differences there, yes, but it might not mean that some engineers are 10 times better than others. And also funny stuff like the original study, which was the original source for this expression, was harshly criticized for being out of touch and for having done strange comparisons. And that's our source for like the idea of 10x engineers. So it's this fantastic tour de force of digging through sources and citations and find this startling lack of evidence. It also investigates waterfall development and finds that it's sort of an inflated enemy that we have to contrast with agile, so there's something bad before. As a side note, some people claim that the Mythical Man Month describes waterfall development because it's quite structured. But I would say that it's more of being as agile as possible given development in the 60s and 70s. Yes, they were printing documentation and sending it around to people, but they didn't have source control. They didn't have generation tools. They had to bring documentation to people somehow, and they actually managed to do it with somewhat slower tools, but still. And speaking of stories we love to tell ourselves, we love to read about hammers. Sometimes it seems our line of work is all about hammer-driven development. All you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Oh boy, I gotta pick the right hammer. There are so many good articles about hammers. And it's sort of easy to forget about solving actual problems, because it's so much easier to talk for so much longer about how we might solve this larger, more general problem with the right hammer. And it's also so much easier to discuss large general hammer type problems without actually having to do anything. It's another way to focus on the tools rather than what you do with them, and it can make it seem sometimes like everyone's always thinking about just the tools and not actually doing stuff with them. And I feel like perhaps there should be a warning bell going off in our mind every time we're trying to solve a problem and our mind starts wondering, which tool should I pick for this? So why aren't we moving forward and making things clearer? I mean, perhaps it's because what we do isn't science. It's definitely not a hard science like mathematics or physics. Perhaps it's more of a craft, or more of an art, perhaps. Perhaps structuring and defining and hard data is completely the wrong thing to go for. Perhaps we should have papers on beauty and simplicity and elegance. I mean, we have some of them, but maybe we should have more. And perhaps it's also the pull of, I'm sorry, I'm pulling in an Apple term here, the pull of being in between technology and the liberal arts. This is a place where the discipline called informatics put itself from the start. It's what I studied, and it's a great experience for learning to learn other things. It's not so great if you want to type code as such. But anyway, informatics places itself between organizations and computers, and studying that part. And it has had this same problem. Even I, as a young student, noticed that this discipline seems kind of schizophrenic and kind of scared and trying very much to clarify where it is and where it isn't. And maybe that's simply part of it. We want to look and feel and think like engineering, but there are so few parts of our whole job that actually can be meaningfully handled that way. I mean, we write code, and you can learn a lot about reasoning about the technical side of our field, and definitely apply an engineering-like mindset there. But if you build anything which actually runs into more than one user, perhaps not even that, you get into those soft, interesting, touchy-feely parts. And they can be the ones that matter so much more. The ones for which great tech and engineering are perhaps at best a multiplier. So stubbornly trying to jam engineering principles on those softer problems might not be doing us any good at all. So now for the somewhat more perhaps depressing part of the talk. This one has changed a lot. Sometimes it's been a really big, really depressing side. But what if we slow down? Or maybe it's a bit too fluffy. What happens when we slow down? I mean, there are many interesting types of slowdowns, but I mean, we are pretty much here because there's such demand from us. What happens if demand drops If there's oversupply of developers, will we be able to motivate working on developer experience in the same way? Will these stacks of things we build be defensible? And it sometimes seems to me like we're sort of spinning the wheels, and I wonder if we couldn't do more with all these resources we have available right now. And if there's a backlash of some kind, how will that look? And sometimes I think maybe what if we are an industry of spoiled babies, sort of being able to spend more time on whatever looks more interesting at the moment? What happens if that changes? I don't know. Or what about a technical slowdown? What if storage becomes much more expensive all of a sudden? What if energy demands go up so that we can't motivate having servers in the cloud or think of it as having infinite capacity? Or simply that long predicted end of Moore's law? I mean, hopefully the slowdown isn't because civilization has collapsed, but you never know. What will happen to agile coaches in the wasteland? Now, a total side note, who doesn't want Immortan Joe in their slide deck? There's also the sort of ethical and ecology part of this. I mean, we have triple backups, offshore vaults, we have mountain halls and generators, and when a hurricane hit New York a couple of years back, people at Squarespace were working through the floods in New York. They were carrying diesel fuel by hand upstairs to generators on top of skyscrapers to keep Squarespace running, which is a web hosting platform with important properties such as Roderick on the Line and merlinman.com. I mean, it's fantastic that they go to these lengths, that they really burn for their craft so much, but is it the right thing to spend resources on? Is it defensible for me to have like 4-time backups of this presentation? I mean, sure, it will go into an archive somewhere. Surely people will dig this up and find that this is the essence of our time. Or maybe not, maybe not. I mean, Bitcoin, we keep talking about the energy requirements of Bitcoin, but we also have stuff like machine learning for companies who want to analyze people to sell more ads. Is that a good thing to work on? Or optimizing a new virtual machine for PHP, maintaining an open source framework to speed up complex web apps while an ad company pays the bills. Is that really the best thing to spend energy on? And the optimistic approach is, of course, to think that we'll sort of accelerate out of this. We'll keep going and we'll come up with completely new things that solve the problems and perhaps create some new ones to worry about, of course. But when we do all this work for ad money, doesn't it seem like we have a little too few real problems to focus on? Have we gained something if the resources do run out? I mean, the hope is, of course, that we can use the speed up part like that to solve problems along the way, which will be useful with even less resources, but we still have to spend them on meaningful things. That was a bit depressing. Let's get positive again. Slowdown. Slowdowns are awesome, because a slowdown means a time to catch up. I mean, if processors and hardware slows down, we get to optimize. We get to optimize. We get to optimize for the hardware. We get to do really cool stuff, and we can build custom hardware for our problems. I mean, I don't know if anyone was around and read articles the way I did when the PlayStation 2 came out, but it was a super weird architecture, and people had to learn it and optimize for it, and games, just like all consoles, started looking better and better the more people figured out. I still remember the first game I played where they figured out how to get full screen anti-aliasing to work on a PS2. It was fantastic. I mean, I want more of that stuff. I want to use the hardware better, but if the hardware keeps improving quickly, we have all these excuses to burn the power on something else. Let's put another VM in between me and the hardware, and then another abstraction layer. Maybe we don't need a VM for the things we do. Maybe we could figure out a faster way to do it. And this is actually something people are talking about. I heard Chris Lattner of LLVM and Swift fame talk about this, that he's really excited about the opportunities coming up to actually optimize really well for the hardware. And if you think about it, it's something a company like Apple has been doing with the iPhone for a long time. They build their custom chips, and they had this scrolling advantage over Android for a long time because, you know what, there's no garbage collector here. You had to write code in C and Objective-C. It was weird, but people did it, and it was fast. So I think it's an interesting challenge to think, how do we add value when there's less resources, and what fun things can we do if we don't think that resources are endless and things will get faster all the time? And as a web developer, it feels kind of worrying, but maybe I won't be adding value by stacking JavaScript frameworks on top of virtual machines in the cloud and then wrapping it up in Electron and shipping it and signing it. So, good stuff to do, question mark. Some of the stuff is good, some is more of a question mark. Good work. I found a really interesting article about this. It will be linked, of course. Good work is a bad thing in this case. Watch out for good work. So what is good work? Good work is this big pull request which changes a lot of little things in different places to add this function that people really need. It's a really good function, but it needs discussing because it's a large change. It's a complex solution to a complex problem. And this is what the article calls good work, because it's kind of seductive. It's a big change. Someone needs to be skilled to do it. It obviously took a lot of work, and it solves this complex problem. And so this big thing lands, and then you have to fix around it. And you might need to create more good work to handle the good work you just added. So what the article wants us to think about is rather great work. I mean, bad work is simple. You can tell bad work. But great work is it's the simple solution to the complex problem. That surprisingly small thing that comes from insight and thinking about it and managing to reduce complexity. That's worth striving for. Good work, watch out for it. And there's also right work mentioned here, but I think we're really good at encouraging that. Right work is stuff that's good to do, however boring or trivial it is. And I think we like to talk about refactoring and technical debt and stuff like that. So I think we have right work covered. And it goes on to say that successful system is a construction of great work on a foundation of right work with the inevitable good work here and there. And my personal feeling is that I probably do a bit more good work than I should. And when I started getting into Mac development back in the 14th century, I was struck by it felt different to me because I felt there was a real development community. It was pretty small at the time. This was before the iPhone, so who cared about Macs? Well, the people who were there, they really cared. There was this level of care and attention to detail, and yeah, it really was a community, and even the sort of stars of the community felt very approachable, and they discussed their problems and their solutions. And what dawned on me after a while was that what I felt set it apart from other communities where I had read stuff or participated was that there was a real focus on solving the problem at hand in a good way with the tools at hand. People were discussing how they implemented a feature of their app, and it didn't end up being this generalized open source framework or applying the right patterns in the right order. It was actually, yeah, I wrote this bit of code to solve this problem because it was missing between these other pieces that the frameworks provided or something like that. And I would like to hear if there are more communities where there's this same attitude, because I haven't really seen it in the same way, with the same feeling. And that's probably just me latching onto something. It's interesting to be wrong. Tell me about it. So I really think about that, like trying to solve the problem sort of all the way from some reasonable ground up, like implementing that little algorithm you need instead of importing a huge package and hoping it will solve the problem. I think this is actually kind of a superpower, to think that I can figure this part out and I can do it from top to bottom, which I guess is great work. It seems to be like going in the same direction. And this one, I'm going to try to go against the grain here. On one hand, it's awesome to create open source and to contribute to open source. It's good learning experience, you get interactions, we're sort of contributing to the shared knowledge of developers in the world, and it's well spent. It's this incredible gift to society, but I'm going to suggest another side here. Perhaps you shouldn't release everything as open source for your own good, because it's a lot of extra work, especially if it goes anywhere. In the worst case, people end up with a whole extra unpaid job. And I mean, this is actually being discussed quite a lot, often referred to as open source burnout, or maintainer burnout. It's about maintainers have something that becomes so popular that people start expecting, or even by the sound of it, demanding that they pay attention to their problem right now. And it's open source, so you should fix it right away without any compensation. And then the maintainer drowns under demands, burns out, goes into woodworking. And it's being discussed, like I said. I mean, maintainers are talking about it, and there are also some really good, actually, white papers about it. There's one called Roads and Bridges that I'm also linking, about how much everyone relies on open source software, but how poorly supported it is, even though it's essential to so many things. And it's easy to think that, yeah, this is for huge projects. It will never apply to me, but do you really need the risk, though? And there's also the other question that I think is interesting here is it worth bringing the code into the state where it's meaningfully releasable? Because, yeah, I solved the problem in my case, and now I'm tempted, I should release this as open source. That's nice. I could help someone else solve the problem. But now I can start thinking about the general problem. Sure, I just glued two strings together here, but I could read the RFC and I could implement all of that stuff, and then I could put that on GitHub, and now I've created extra work for myself, even though I haven't actually released anything yet. Maybe my solution to my unique problem should be specific enough to not be worth releasing as open source. Maybe I should solve my problem, that part. I've been thinking back and forth about this, and yeah, it depends. I have some code that I've been thinking about this actively, and it's really good for solving my problem, but then I start calculating what I would need to solve a general problem in the same area, and it's a whole different beast, and it won't add any value to the app I'm creating. So I'm still holding off. I'm not saying I'll succeed forever, but I'm holding off, and I think it's also an interesting question to ask. Do I really want it? And what would happen if I released it and it was also successful? Would I want that job? And along the lines of simpler, quicker software, I read another great article by a writer named Craig Modd. He has a great website. It's a huge rabbit hole of well-written texts sometimes about software, sometimes not, sometimes about walking in Japan. Equally readable, equally thought-provoking. He wrote an article called Fast Software, the Best Software, where he reminded me of the virtues of actual fast software and what a difference that makes. I mean, like I said, we keep thinking about hardware speeds up. Let's use that for a better developer experience. We install frameworks, we install packages, we glue things together. But something that's really fast can actually have a whole different quality than something that's slow. If a piece of software is fast to use, the barriers become lower. It's fun. It encourages experimentation because starting over is easier. Doing the same thing many times is quicker. And fast also probably means focused. If you can't do a lot with an app, it's probably easier to do the few things you want to do than if you had 1,000 different options hidden away in words, menus, and submenus. And almost as a side note, he also throws in the idea in the picture, which I find even more fascinating. Because in question form it goes, why doesn't good software become faster and more polished over time? And he likens it to a rock being polished by a stream. And I really love that. Why do we always add things? Why do we build coral reefs instead of smooth pebbles in the stream? I mean, surely there should be a 2.0 where we're able to polish and simplify the workflows of the 1.0 now that everyone has actually had time to use it and figure out which parts we need. Why can't we write a faster implementation that's more specific to the problems people actually want solved rather than this big general thing we wrote before we actually figured out a few use cases? I really love that. Pebbles in a stream instead of coral reefs. I build coral reefs. Hi. So find a thing to do, simplify it, and then perhaps worry about the patterns and stuff and the tools when they're needed. I was thinking not only keep it simple stupid, but make it simple stupid. MISS doesn't quite land as an abbreviation, but still, we don't have to just be simple from the start. We can make it simpler. Maybe we can delete stuff every once in a while. It also tries to connect very clearly to not being too clever when writing code. I mean, we all know that if we're as clever as we can possibly be when we're solving a problem and writing the code, we can never be clever enough to read or debug it afterward. I know that. So I like to see simplification there as well, where I try to simplify for myself there as well. And I was looking for a catchy way of saying this. And of course, one of the pragmatic programmers, Andy Hunt, had went and said it in a really nice way. And on a podcast, no less. Boring has its place. I really love that. I mean, it works for everything. It works from how I write my code to solving the problem to the tools I select and ever on. I mean, boring is in a way the most efficient you can possibly be, because nothing is better than an unexciting solution. I mean, something you look at and go, yeah, that makes total sense. And it has absolutely nothing interesting about it. What's better than that? Could boring be the signifier of great work? And there's empathy. People, like I said, this is a nice fuzzy discipline. And it's the soft part of the software that's fuzziest and most difficult and most exciting. So I just want to say, talk to people. Go to a conference. Talk to someone next to you. It's super hard. It's super hard, and it gets you so many good ideas. It's perhaps the best exercise you can do. And our world has kind of made it easier and easier to disconnect. Sometimes because we need to, sometimes because we want to, and with our current social media, it's even become kind of trendy. It's like, yeah, I'm deleting Facebook. I'm closing down all my apps. And I think there's some good to that as well, but I think we should keep thinking about people and spend time interacting in well-chosen ways. It's a worthy pursuit, even in your own work Slack, to talk to people. Because I want to get away from this thing. Merlin Mann likes to say that everyone else is irrational, but I have my reasons. And that rings super true to me. I have my reasons, but that request they had, that customer demand, that's just insane. They're just irrational. They don't know what they're talking about. I know what I'm talking about. Wait a minute, maybe they come from a good point. Maybe they have a point. Maybe I should ask them what it's actually about. And once I start thinking about that, it's so much harder to become upset with those strange demands. Because they're an opportunity to learn something. They say, this is broken. Oh, is it? Is it? In what way? What could I do? Is there something even I should change? Maybe it's not a bug this time. Maybe it's the wording of a label. That's a really satisfying way of solving the problem. I didn't have to write any code. Just edited some text. And it also becomes really clear to me just how often I and most other people jump to that conclusion. Everyone else is irrational. I have my reasons. And this one, speaking of how this talk is evolving gradually, I was talking to an open source maintainer the other day, and we stumbled on this about decision problems. And I feel like this is a major forgotten challenge as well, because when it's hard to decide what to do, you end up feeling less certain about like pouring focus and energy into something. I'll just sit down and fix this obvious bug over here instead. And people can drop in and sway you in a different directions, like, shouldn't we be doing this instead? Yeah, maybe. I'm working on this thing, but nobody's told me it's important in a while now, so yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe we should go over there. And I wonder, is there a way of working or thinking that can really help with this? Because I can use all the patterns and frameworks in the world if I could just decide which one of these 3 different things to work on. And I can be stuck there for such a long time, and then I have all these candy tickets that would be like quick bug fixes. It's easy. I could pick them instead. But I should be working on this thing, or maybe that thing, or maybe that one. Or maybe the 5th one that nobody's ever mentioned to me, but it will pop up in a week. So I just wanted to throw that one out there. Deciding is hard as well. And I don't think I have it figured out. And the person I was talking to didn't have it figured out either. He was like, yeah, I try to ask people sometimes and then give feedback sometimes, but usually not. And then I do something and then I tell them afterward. So to start wrapping this up, where does this lead us? And I've talked about a lot of like strange things we do and things we perhaps should do more of. But there are people out there doing good things as well. And there are probably like a million obvious famous people and projects I could mention, but I like to be problematic and mention the people that I don't know about. Because there are all those developers, all those programmers out there who never write blog posts and who never stream on Twitch or speak at conferences. Those people who work 9 to 5 and repeatedly apply well-tested solutions using tools they know well to concrete problems, to save time and make people money, create value. I want to meet more of those people. I want to make more of those people talk about things. People are actually using the framework to solve the problems. Again, boring has its place. Boring is the best. If you do boring stuff, I want to talk to you. And it stuck me after a while. Actually, on Sunday, when I was out for a run, that I think this kind of boils down to two things. Number one, we have the general problem. It's this big seductive thing. It's what you build a framework to solve. I can solve the general problem of this. I can be the X for the Y. And I start with this piece of code that I have in my app that solves almost the whole problem. And then I generalize too far. And I start working on the general problem. I start the big rewrite, the big second system syndrome, because I want to solve the general problem. We can factor this the right way this time. We can use the right frameworks. We can use the new frameworks because they're obviously so much better. And also the general problem is seductive because it drowns out all the more down-to-earth things. And it's also perhaps one of the things that causes open source maintainers to feel that they need to satisfy all these strange demands on their code, because this is a framework I built for this. Of course it should solve the whole problem, shouldn't it? And of course, on the other side, there are good general things, like operating systems. And I think it's really good that I'm not writing SSL implementations myself to solve my specific problem. But on the other hand, we have the specific solution. Instead of the general problem, we have the specific solution. It's that specific solution to the specific problem. The great work, that small simplifying thing. The pebbles instead of the coral reefs. And making a decision and sticking with it and solving that part. And those people who just solve the problems and don't talk enough about it. And the reason also that I was appealed by those Mac developers back in the day, they were talking about specific solutions to specific problems. And that disappears so easily behind the big general problems, because they're so massive. They loom on the horizon, and you can walk around them and look at them from different angles and discuss how you might attack them and chop them down. But do you know who needs to solve the general problem in their app? Nobody. I don't have any general apps. I only have apps that solve specific problems. I mean, not even thinking about it, not even the makers of compilers or hardware need to solve a general problem. They get to specify. We do hardware that does this. I make a compiler for these languages. And I don't need a general cookie parsing library. I need to parse and set my one cookie. There's a difference. So to wrap it up, beware the general problem. Celebrate the specific problem, the specific solution, and have a coffee. Thank you.